Hi, everybody. Welcome to Reader's Intrigue, where authors are going to read the first chapter of their book so that we can be intrigued and maybe find a new book to read. Get comfy, get cozy. Let's listen.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Ellis, adult poetry and fiction writer, currently based in Wrexham, North Wales. I've been writing a few years now, coming to writing relatively late in life, but have been published regularly since I turned 50. Now 59, I've had 2 folk horror novels, The 5 Turns of the Wheel and its sequel Reborn, published, as well as 2 novellas, The Gothic Horror Bottled and Bio-Horror Paused. I've also had many stories published in a variety of magazines and anthologies, and a number have been gathered together in the collections The Reckoning and the more recent Devilkin. In August, my new novel The Woodcutter will be published by Bridget's Press. Here's the blurb, which I hope intrigues you. A tragic accident shrouded in mystery leads to a family reunion in the hidden village of Little Hatchet, located in the smothering shadow of GodBeGone Wood, the home of the mythical Woodcutter and Grandma. Alec Eades rediscovers his bond with GodBeGone Wood and the future his father agreed to many years ago, as nefarious landowner Oliver Hayward schemes to raise money for the village by re-enacting part of the Woodcutter legend. Old wounds are reopened and ties of blood and friendship are tested to the extreme when the woodcutter is summoned and Grandma returns. And now I'm going to read Chapter 1. The Woodcutter, Chapter 1. When Alec opened the door, it was like looking in a mirror. Admittedly, his caller appeared a few years younger, was of a more athletic build, but the other similarities were too strong to deny. If not twins, they could be brothers, an uncomfortable idea. Alec's thoughts were interrupted as the rain, which had eased off after a day of relentless onslaught, renewed its efforts to drown the country. Adding insult to injury, the wind changed direction and delivered the deluge straight at him, his porch providing no protection. He hoped whatever his visitor wanted could be dealt with quickly. The stranger stood in silence, ignoring the discomfort of the elements. "Yes, can I help you?" prompted Alec, hoping his meaningful look at the heavy clouds would convey enough of a hint to bloody well get on with it. "Alec? Alec Eades?" "Yes." At this affirmative, the stranger stared at him harder, making him feel as if he'd been put under a microscope. He squirmed. "Yes?" Alec could hear the irritation in his voice, disliked seeming rude, but the man wasn't helping himself. Seemed almost to be on the point of turning away. Whatever he wanted to say, he was in 2 minds about it. The rain came down harder. Alec wanted nothing more than to shut the door on his intruder. But despite his annoyance, he was curious. Meeting your doppelganger on your doorstep late at night was something which didn't happen very often. Alec tried again. "And you are?" The man looked him directly in the eye as if coming to a decision. Cameron Reeves." The name rang a bell, too vague for any recognition. He continued to wait. "Look, this is bloody awkward and there's no easy way to say this, so I'll go ahead and say it anyway." A gust of wind drove another blast of rain at the men. His visitor was getting a real soaking but did not seem to care. "Yes," encouraged Alec, trying to place the man's accent. It seemed so familiar. Miserable eyes looked at him, despair tinged with something else. Pity? I'm your brother." It came out in a rush. Half-brother, if you want to be completely accurate. They continued to stare at each other, uncomfortable, each not knowing what to say. Alec had seen family reunions on TV, always joyful, even when members had only just learned of each other's existence. He had occasionally pondered his own circumstances, wondered if reconnecting with those his mother had separated him from would result in a similar response. He had his answer, a resounding no. Instead, it felt as if disaster was about to strike. Alec found he wasn't surprised, however, had almost expected this information. After all, his mother had warned him this might happen one day. His father would try and reclaim him, she said, and she spent most of his childhood hiding him from imaginary kidnappers, grabbing his hand at the approach of a stranger, and running off down alleys and side streets until the illusory danger passed. It made him a nervous child, always jumping at shadows, scared to take a risk. Unable to settle in one place and continually moving until finally she felt there were enough miles between them and his birthplace, his mother's fears had cost him a happy childhood. He had refused to let her do the same to the rest of his life, There'd been many arguments about it before she died. "Mark my words," she said, "I won't be in my grave 5 minutes before the past comes crawling out of the woodwork." It didn't matter. He was a grown man, 52 for Christ's sake, more than capable of looking after himself, nor would she explain. Alec hadn't seen his father since he was 5 years old and could remember little of the man or anything of those early years, come to that. What his mum had predicted seemed to be coming true. He was curious. "You'd better come inside," he said, reluctant to admit the stranger, but allowing wind, rain, curiosity, and yes, good old-fashioned common sense to override his wariness. Cameron nodded, his relief evident, and stepped past Alec. Alec took the man's, his brother's, coat and hung it up, its drips already pooling on the hardwood floor. Reeves? The name continued to itch at the back of his mind. He had heard it before. No, seen it. But where? "Through there. I'll grab you a towel." "No, no," said Cameron. "I don't have time." His eyes kept moving to the window, against which the rain continued to hammer. He wore the look of a hunted man. And still Alec waited, until it almost became a repeat of their doorstep conversation, albeit a somewhat drier version. For a man in a hurry, Cameron seemed to be very slow in coming to the point. It gave Alec a chance to study his visitor a little more closely, note the dark smudges beneath his eyes as if he hadn't slept for a week, a feeling Alec knew well. A sudden crack and rumble made them both jump, and Cameron paled at the sound. Alec moved to the window and closed the curtains. "Better?" he asked. "Can't stand thunder and lightning myself. Always frightens the life out of me. Mum used to say it was a devil, losing his temper. She never was very good at reassuring me when I was a kid. Actually, she spent most of my childhood telling me stories which terrified me. I used to have so many nightmares." "Still do," he almost added, stopping himself as he realised he was beginning to ramble, unsure why he'd even started talking about this. He rarely talked about his mum to anybody. Not that he had anyone to talk to, even if he'd wanted to. She'd made sure of that. No woman stuck around once they met her. He waved a whiskey bottle at his guest. Perhaps a drink would loosen the man's tongue, get him to say what he needed to say, speed him up. Alec wasn't a great drinker, but felt tonight it might help. "Time for a quick one?" Cameron nodded, taking the glass from him, although not drinking. Instead he stared at its still surface as if seeking something. Minutes passed before he responded. Minutes which felt like an age. So you might know something then. His guest's behaviour was becoming unnerving, was beginning to make Alec worry perhaps he wasn't all there. "I don't understand," said Alec, sitting down opposite him. "Look, I appreciate you got something to tell me. I mean, you wouldn't have come all this way on a night like this for the fun of it, but it's late and I'm tired. Perhaps tomorrow." His words had the desired effect, stirred Cameron. "Tomorrow? No, no, I've got tonight. One night only, as they say." He gave a hollow laugh, and Alec's heart sank. Whatever was coming would not be good. Reeves. With a start, Alec remembered finding a document with a name on it, and an old address of theirs. Asking his mum about it had put her in a temper. She had said it was a name she had once used, but explained no further beyond saying she never wanted to hear it again. How old had he been? 8, 9? Old enough to know to do as he was told. To do otherwise was to ensure he remained in her bad books for days, and he'd wanted to keep her happy, keep the worry lines from her face. He realised now that must have been her married name, but it hadn't sunk in at the time. Keep the past at bay had been his mum's mantra, and so he had. Everything had been buried, and he had never gone digging. He looked at Cameron with fresh eyes, felt a strange certainty that they were indeed brothers. How had the man found him? Who had told him that Alec existed? He had so many questions, but so it appeared did Cameron, and they were not what he expected. "What do you know about our Dad?" asked Cameron. "What did your mum tell you?" "Not to go near him. Not in those words exactly, but that was always the gist. She said he was the sort of man who'd sell his own child to the devil. When she left him, she reverted to her maiden name, changed mine as well. Never told me what her married name, my original name, was. My birth certificate never showed his name either. She had it changed somehow. Said she didn't want me contaminated. As you can gather, there wasn't a lot of love lost between them. For myself, I can't remember anything, not much anyway." Little things were coming back to him as he recalled her words, but he kept those to himself. He wanted to hear what Cameron had to say first. Cameron nodded. "Your mum was right," he said. "That's why I'm here. As Alec digested his words, he noticed the man's pallor, his grey-tinged skin, bloodshot eyes. Illness marked him. The idea struck that the visit might be due to some unpleasant hereditary condition he needed to be made aware of. He bit down on his impatience. If this was the case, he needed to be understanding. We live in a village called Little Hatchet. It's pretty much in the middle of nowhere, borders an area called the Devil's Axe. Yeah, said Alec. That's as much as Mum would remind me. As I said, I don't have any memory of then. I was 5 when we left. She asked me to at least wait until she died before I ever went digging around in her family. She's always so upset about it. I did as she asked. She's dead then? I'm sorry. A shadow passed over Cameron's face. His words, coming as they did from a stranger, seemed genuine. A month ago. She'd lost it towards the end. All those stories she used to tell me as a kid. That's all she went on about. Obsessed she was. And there was this bloody stupid story about a bloodthirsty monster called the Woodcutter. Kept banging on about him being the devil in disguise. If I'm honest, I was glad when she finally passed. Dementia destroys so much of a person. Why was he telling Cameron, a stranger, all this? And what if it wasn't dementia? The question pulled him up short. What do you mean? What else could it be? The doctor seemed pretty certain. The consultations had been short, almost dismissive. They'd given his mother a label, and he had never questioned it. It had allowed him to dismiss her stories, her obsessions, as simply part of her diagnosis. Cameron shook his head. What if I told you there might be some truth behind those stories? Alex stared at Cameron. Was the man nuts? Evidence that lunacy ran in their family? For God's sake, don't tell me you've come to simply tell me the same stories. You probably mean well, in some bizarre way. But it's late. I'm tired. I think you should go. Cameron ignored his request. You're not sleeping well, are you? Dreams? Nightmares? Look. Cameron waved his hand to cut him off. I'm the same. Haven't had a good night's sleep for weeks. Can you get to the point? Said Alec, taking Cameron's glass from him and standing, a not so subtle hint that perhaps it was time to go. The gesture was ignored. I need your help. We've got a younger brother. I want you to come back to the village with me. We need your help. 10 minutes ago, Alec had been alone in the world, to all intents and purposes an orphan, regardless his father was alive somewhere. Now he had 2 brothers. He sat back down, torn between wanting Cameron gone and finding out more. Help with what? Look, we've never met before tonight. I know nothing about you, and you expect my help. If you've got trouble, you should go to the police. Another thought struck him. Is he ill? Are you after a donor for something or other? Alex shifted uneasily in his chair at the thought he might be put on the spot to offer up a part of himself. How was he going to say no without being made to feel guilty? He could not look Cameron in the eye, but his brother merely laughed. Don't worry, he's not ill or anything like that. The sort of trouble in our family isn't the sort you can go to the authorities or the doctors with. They'd laugh at us, say we're mad, like your mum. That stung. Alec had his own opinions on his mother's mental state, but it didn't mean anyone else could make those statements. I don't know what this is, what trouble you're in, but I can't help you. He wanted rid of the man. An even louder clap of thunder boomed over their heads. They both jumped. Alec rose to his feet. Please, I think you should leave. He wanted the man gone. Cameron had brought something unpleasant with him into his house, a sense of futility, of something reaching out to snare him, and he felt as if he'd been caught. His newly discovered brother finished his drink and nodded to himself. Can't blame a man for trying, he said. I hoped you'd hear me out. After all, the woodcutter will come for you one day, and you won't stand a chance. It was nice to meet you anyway. He held out his hand, and Alex shook it, felt the rough skin of his hand, worn and calloused as if used to hard work, wielding an axe. Alec pushed the thought away. The storm, his mother's death, the appearance of Cameron, it was sending his mind down a very dark path. The downcast expression on Cameron's face made Alec feel ashamed. He felt bad for his dismissal of Cameron, wanted to make amends. Perhaps we could meet tomorrow, have a proper talk after we've both rested. Perhaps, said Cameron, but I doubt I'll be allowed. And with that he was gone, a dark shadow disappearing into the wind and the rain. Is there any way I can contact you? A phone number? Shouted Alec after the retreating figure. But Cameron didn't stop, kept walking into the darkness. A sudden burst of thunder made any further attempts to attract Cameron's attention pointless. Retreating into the warmth of the front room, Alex sank back into the sofa, reaching for the nearby whiskey, and this time drinking straight from the bottle. As he stretched out and tried to rid himself of the guilt beginning to gnaw at him for his treatment of Cameron, his eyes fell on a box tucked under the coffee table. It contained papers and photos belonging to his mum, one of the final things left to go through, but which he hadn't been able to bring himself to look at. He'd had a feeling it linked to his past, and he hadn't been quite ready to go digging, although he had kept it in plain sight, as a reminder he needed to get on with it, at some point. After Cameron's visit, perhaps now was the time. He'd track Cameron down tomorrow, somehow. Alec took another drink from the bottle and hooked his foot around the box, nudging it out into the open. When it was near enough, he reached out and pulled it closer. Did he really want to look? There was another clap of thunder, but it was more distant, the storm moving away, following Cameron, poor sod. Alec rolled over onto his stomach, placing the bottle on the floor beside the box, and pushed the lid off. An old black and white photograph lay on top, showing a cottage in the middle of the wood. It sat in a glade surrounded by huge trees, an ominous protection. Nothing about the image indicated a rural idyll. He turned it over. Grandma's cottage was scribbled on its back. No date. Grandma. Much like the building in his nightmares, the one filled with blood and the boy. Another picture. This time a man with his arm around a young woman he recognised as his mum. Her arm rested across her belly. Had this been taken when she was expecting him? He turned it over. Me and Doug, 1965. No, that was 2 years before he was born. Did he have another brother, a sister even? When she left 47 years ago, wouldn't she have brought them too? But Cameron didn't mention an older sibling, only a younger one. He'd an older brother or sister, family. For as long as he could remember, it had just been him and his mum. She never allowed anyone else, any man, into her life. Said she'd had enough of marriage to last her a lifetime, and would keep the surname she'd been born with rather than the name of the man who'd declared his ownership. Bloody hell, Mum, he muttered. Why didn't you explain? He continued to pull papers and photos out at random, fragments of family trees showing the intertwining lineage of Reeves and Eades. A picture of a young boy who looked nothing like himself, yet seemed familiar. Was he family? The name Oliver Talbot was scrawled across the bottom. Yellowing newspaper clippings accompanied the image. Alec read them with a growing sense of revulsion. He picked up the photo of the cottage again, the clippings which seemed to revel in their gruesome tale of the horrific murder of a young mother and her newborn child within that dwelling. Scanning the lines, he saw that the boy Oliver had been a part of those terrible deeds despite his young age. Alec took another drink, vaguely aware the bottle was emptying fast. He needed it, though. The boy was that child from his nightmares. How could that be? The victim, Rosie Groves, and her son were killed by a drug-crazed couple who'd believed themselves to be the Woodcutter and Grandma reincarnated. Woodcutter and Grandma, those horrors of local legend, those stories of his mother. Groves? He'd seen that name somewhere. Alec looked again at the family tree, saw the link to the Groves family. The woman was his aunt, his mother's sister. He was beginning to understand why his mum never wanted to talk about it. Finally, he reached the bottom of the box, and an old envelope addressed to his mum. It carried her married name, Mary Reeves. Disappointingly, it was empty. Alec rolled onto his back, felt his eyes grow heavy as he studied the envelope. Why did she keep it? On the back was the sender's name and address, Doug Reeves, Little Hatchet Bookshop, Little Hatchet. His father, had she deliberately left it for him, a blessing on any future reunion, or was it merely something he'd forgotten? The owner of a bookshop, that was a surprise. How could something so unexciting harbour the monster of his mother's stories? His focus was slipping and his eyes gradually closed as the empty bottle fell from his grasp to lie amongst the papers and pictures scattered along the sofa. The envelope remained clutched to his chest. As he slept, the storm continued to rage. So that's most of chapter 1, and if you'd like to buy it, you can find purchase links at Bridgesgate Press, www.bridgesgatepress.com, and also on my website, www.stephanieellis.org. I can be found at Twitter as elstevie, that's EL_Stevie, and I am easily found on Facebook, Instagram, and Goodreads, although Twitter is usually my main home. So I hope you'll pick up the Woodcutter, and if you enjoy it, why not give me a shout and let me know. Thank you for listening.
Thank you again to the amazing author that read us a story, and be sure to check out all the other amazing shows on RB Media. Till next time, bye!